It is 5 minutes past the top of the hour, and I think we should begin our journey. Good morning and good afternoon. And I say that because we have folks calling in, just like I said, from every corner of the U.S. Like we said, Philadelphia, Seattle, Southern California, Boston, Phoenix, Boise, Las Vegas, so much more. And like a couple of you guys said, the Bay Area, where today's special guest hails from. So welcome you all. My name is Lauren Roberts, and I'm part of the marketing and communications team here at HumanGood. You might have seen me at your community with cameras or drones, filming video or taking photos. I love getting out of my stuffy office here in Pasadena, California, and coming to your homes. You've been so welcoming to me every time I come onto a campus, so thank you for that. I would also be remiss if I didn't welcome some of our many special guests from across the country. You might not live in a HumanGood community yet, but we're hoping you move in someday soon. This mission of HumanGood for residents, team members, family members, and more is to empower you to live your version of your best life in whatever form that might take. And these events, planned and sponsored by the Connections team, aim to do that by connecting all of us, both to each other and to amazing personalities from around the world. We have spoken with authors, artists, motivational speakers, filmmakers, historians, and more. The last Connections team that I hosted was a holiday sing-along smack dab in the middle of the pandemic when we weren't even allowed to see each other in person. But we hope that these events spark joy and help you explore your best life through community and conversation. There's a couple housekeeping things. As you saw, you got muted as you came in, and I request that you continue to mute yourself because when we have too many people unmuted, it makes it difficult for the speaker to speak. So go ahead and stay muted. We'd appreciate that. But if you have a question, toss that question in the chat because there will be several of us looking at the chat. I will try and work those questions into our conversation today. And then maybe if we have time at the end, we might actually let people unmute themselves after the hour's over and keep the conversation going if we want to. So that brings us to today. I'm honored to introduce Joshua Kosman to the HumanGood family. Joshua has had a front row seat to a musical mecca, San Francisco and the entire Bay Area. Since 1988, he has written about classical music for the San Francisco Chronicle, reviewing and reporting on orchestral, operatic, chamber, and contemporary music. And today we want to talk about what he's learned over those decades of writing and where he thinks we are headed in the arts. I want to point out that Joshua's recent retirement was noted nationwide because there are fewer and fewer music critics, not even a dozen maybe, who are dedicated to writing about music, classical or otherwise, at the major papers in the United States. So we're sort of at a crossroads for music criticism. I also want to mention that Joshua has a personal connection to HumanGood. Sarah Jollis is our executive director of brand marketing, and her husband and Joshua are longtime friends from childhood. So let's get into it. Welcome, 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 Joshua. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. Now, I gave the 20-second overview of your career, but it's so much richer than that. Now, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'd be happy to. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you today. I'm really honored and delighted to have the chance to talk to everyone. I can see all your faces in my little laptop screen, and it's a pleasure to feel that there's all these folks all over the country tuning in today. I want to also, give a shout out to not only my fellow Bay Area people, but Philadelphia is my original home turf. As Lauren said, I grew up with Sarah's husband Nathaniel. We were childhood chums from about the age of 3, and my mother lived for a while in one of the HumanGood communities in Rosemont, Presby's Independent Living, and enjoyed it as much as my mother was able to enjoy anything. I'm giving a little razz to my mother, but it was a wonderful and supportive and enriching community for her, and we really appreciated the care that she got and the time that she spent there. Having said all that, yeah, let's move on. I have, as Lauren said, I was the classical music critic at the San Francisco Chronicle for 36 years, which was really one of the most blessed and enjoyable ways I can think of to have spent a career. Going to musical events, which was really the greatest source of pleasure that I could have ever imagined, and having the privilege of writing about them and sharing my reactions and my opinions and my thoughts and feelings with a large and very sensitive and very connected readership in San Francisco and throughout the Bay Area. It's a job that I set out to do as a very young man, actually, as a freshman in college, because I was always a great music lover and wanted to find and figure out a way to spend a career in music or adjacent to music. And the only drawbacks to that were that I had no musical talent and none of the discipline necessary to develop what talents I had. So it was kind of a way of, the task for me was to try and figure out whether there was some way I could worm my way into a career next to and adjacent to doing to the things I loved without actually doing them myself. And my freshman year of college, I happened to pick up the student newspaper and saw somebody had written a review of one of the student orchestra concerts. And I thought, the little light bulb went off in my head, and I started thinking, I wonder if there's room in this strange world for me. So I went down to the student newspaper office and I said, can I help? Can I do this? And they said, sure, because it was the student newspaper and they didn't have an abundance of undergraduates eager to write at length about Beethoven symphonies. So they said, sure, the orchestra concert is coming up in a week. Why don't you get a ticket and go down there and see what you have to say about it? Which is what I did. I went to the concert and I had a lot of thoughts. And then I sat in the student library with a big legal pad. This was 1977. There were no laptops. There were no computers. There were no you had a pen and a piece of paper, the way God intended. And I looked at that blank piece of paper for, no joke, about 5 or 6 hours, thinking, okay, what have I gotten myself into? What am I doing? How am I going to do this? And eventually I figured it out and I wrote something and I said, wow, that was really, really hard. I want to do it again. And from there, one thing led to another. I wrote a lot for the student newspaper. I became the arts editor. I did some work as a freelance critic, and I moved out to California at some point because I wanted to do more studying in the music department at UC Berkeley. I did not expect to stay out here. This was, I'm Philadelphia born and bred, and I thought, well, the East Coast is where the world is. I'll make a little sojourn here in California, but it's not a life sentence, surely. But I was wrong because, one never knows how the world is going to go. I came out here for graduate school, and while I was here, just before I was sort of just as I was getting to the end of my graduate program, a job opened up at the Chronicle, and I applied and was hired. And then I met my wife, and then I had a house, and now I've been here for 40 years, and I guess I'm never coming home. I am home, I have to say. I don't want to make it sound that way. I mean, there was a period in there where we used to think, my wife is from Reading, Pennsylvania, and we used to think, oh, one day we'll head east, but it never did happen. And now we're locals, and our daughter is a native-born Californian and committed to it. but that's just sort of me. So the thing about writing about classical music for the newspaper, I found over the years, is that there's a wonderful kind of diversity of the readership that you have. In other words, if you're a newspaper writer and you're covering, oh, let's say the presidential election, or let's say you're covering the local sports team, there's a kind of an assumption that you're writing on a topic that's of general interest to just about everyone, right? People pick up the paper, they want to read the sports, they want to read the political news. Some want to read the local political news. Some want to read about the movies. But classical music is and always has been a kind of a niche subject, a little bit, right? And so I had the wonderful challenge over these past decades of trying to write about a subject that readers might not think they were interested in necessarily, but giving myself the challenge of trying to prove them wrong. In other words, the people who are the symphony subscribers, the opera subscribers, they know who I am. They know where to come and find me. They are interested and engaged in the classical music world. If I were writing only for them, that would have been easy and interesting and fun, but limiting. I felt that I wanted to try and get everyone I could, and so I set out from a very early age to try and write about classical music in a way that would interest people who were coming past coming past my article on their way to the sports section, on their way to the movie reviews, on their way to the funny pages, which is where I was for most of my time. I was right in front of the funny pages, so you couldn't get to Doonesbury without going past me. And if I could write something that would grab you by the coattails as you went by, I thought, well, maybe I can have a chance to inspire some interest in this world that is so important to me, and try and sort of sell you. So I was kind of a proselytizer, but also an audience member, and a commentator, and all of these things carried on into my time at the paper there. As Lauren mentioned, I just now, earlier this year, retired from the paper. I'd been there 36 years, and it was a long time. And the newspaper, like other newspapers, like I'm sure the newspapers in all your neighborhoods, is going in weird, scary, nervous-making directions. And, if we want to talk about the future of journalism, that's certainly a good and important and slightly depressing topic for us to pursue. But the main thing is, I wanted to say that I felt it was time for me to step down, but I didn't feel like it was time to stop doing the things that had always been appealing to me. So I resigned. I retired in April. I spent the summer worrying about what to do next, and then come the fall, I put into practice a plan that I'd had all along, which was to start my own weekly column on a website called Substack, which makes available the software and the platform for people who want to write things and put them out there for people to read. So I've been doing that now for the past month and a half, and I'll tell you more about that as we proceed. But the upshot is that I'm finding now a kind of a new and slightly reformed way of writing about the things that have always interested me, and that I think interest some of the people who live in the community and further afield. Now I'll take a breath and
Yeah, no,
Lauren
thank
has a
you.
question for me.
That's amazing. Well, actually, I see a question already in the chat. How did your position at the paper open up? And I'll
Oh,
have some follow up questions to that. And did you graduate from Berkeley? And was that in music, or what
yes.
was going on at Berkeley?
Those are both good questions. I'll take them in the opposite order. So my training is in music, which is to say, not music performance. I was a very bad pianist in my youth, and I've given it up entirely in recent years. But my training was in musicology, which is the study of music, music history, music theory, the music literature. If you think about what an art historian does relative to what a painter does, that's musicology, right? I mean, grossly speaking. So my undergraduate and graduate degrees are in musicology. Um, however, as I mentioned, I never had any other career aspiration except for the one that I ended up in. And like many scholarly fields, musicology is mostly designed to train musicologists, to train musicologists, to train musicologists, which is a completely legitimate practice. I don't mean to disrespect musicology. It's my great life source, but I didn't. I like my friend Nathaniel there. I had grown up in academia. Both our parents are professors, and I knew that the life of an academic would not be suited to me temperamentally. I don't have that kind of patience. I don't have that kind of Sitzfleisch to sit and work on things for long periods of time that scholars need to do. So, but I did want to feel that I was approaching this job with a certain amount of education under my belt. So when I got out of college, I worked for a couple years in New York as a freelance writer and also a computer programmer. And then when I went to apply to graduate programs in musicology, I wrote a very candid application essay that said, look, I understand what that, your program is designed to train scholars. I'm not planning to be a scholar. I'd like to be a newspaper critic. Would you educate me anyway? And Harvard laughed at me, and Yale laughed at me, and UC Berkeley said, yeah, that's just the kind of interesting, offbeat kind of person we'd love to have. Why don't you come and study with us? And I said, great. And that's how I ended up here. I mean, parenthetically, I was in a program that year, that was the fall of 1983, in which all the first year students were kind of weird offbeat admissions choices, and none of us made it into the world of academia. And so I think they felt like maybe one or two of like that was a good idea, but going all in was maybe a little much. And the next year they admitted nothing but really serious hardcore scholars who have all gone on to grace the halls of academia. Um, and Somebody who I think knows the answer but asked it anyway said, how did my job at the paper become open? The answer to the question is there was some kind of malfeasance by a predecessor. I don't, I can't quite pretend to know all the details because I was just a civilian at the time. But I was reading the San Francisco Chronicle one morning, and there was a little announcement that said, "Hey, we're sorry to tell you this, but we the other day we ran a review of a performance by members of the San Francisco Ballet, because parenthetically at that time the Chronicle's coverage of classical music and dance was covered by a single department of people who were sort of multitaskers. They said there was this performance by the San Francisco Ballet in Stern Grove, which is this beautiful outdoor venue in South San Francisco. And our review said that there was our review said there was a man and a woman in this potted and that they danced very poorly, but in fact, that piece had been replaced on the program, and it wasn't performed, and instead they put on a piece for 5 male dancers, with the subtext being no one who was there could possibly have mistaken one for the other, even with the. So we're so embarrassed, and we've let the men who wrote the review go, and we apologize to our readers and to the San Francisco Ballet. And I picked it up and I went, oh, so there's an opening. And I put in my application. And it took them a while to kind of fill the spot, but then they did. And I was the number 2 classical music critic for a little while, until the man who had been there for a lot of years retired, and they promoted me, and then I was there, like my father. I had the one job my entire career, and so I was never able to leverage any kind of thing into a pay raise of any kind. But that's another story.
Oh, wow. So I have one follow-up to that. I think you tell a story. Was it your very first concert that you reviewed for the Chronicle that was Chanticleer? I'm going to share my screen. If you guys see, can you guys see Chanticleer there from the 1980s?
Yeah.
Was that your very first concert that you reviewed?
My very first, yes. That is a wonderful men's chorus. That's very much the 70s, 80s incarnation of that group, but it's still going strong. It's a beautiful ensemble, and I'm glad you showed the picture and not my review, because my review was really quite bad. It was the first one. I mean, I had written reviews before, but it was the first one for the paper, and I didn't understand until it appeared in the paper that these great big long paragraphs that I had written were going to land as big black hunks of text. And I learned a few things, but it was very nerve-wracking. I remember going to this concert and sitting there taking copious notes lest I forget anything. And then I sat down the next morning at my typewriter and started to, and did the same thing I always did for 20 years, which is, stare at the blank sheet for 2 hours, in the course of which a friend of mine called me and said, "Hey, how's the new job going?" I said, "Well, it's funny you call right now." I said, "Because my very first review is going to appear in tomorrow morning's paper, which is really interesting to me, because that means that sometime between now and next morning, it's going to be written. I can't envision at the moment how that is possible, but I know for sure it's going to appear, like the paper is going to come out and the review will be in it. So that's a fixed fact that I can, cling on to, is that it will get written." And so that one was hard. And then the next one was infinitesimally less hard, and so forth over the course of decades. My predecessor used to have a little koan that he said, which I really quite liked, even though I didn't quite understand what it meant, but it always felt it had a grain of truth, felt to me as though I had a grain of truth. He would say, as time goes by, writing doesn't get any easier, but it does get a little less difficult. And I thought, yeah, okay, I can see that. And now, having been a writer for all these decades, it does come more easily, but it took a long time.
So you, like I said in the intro, you are kind of, it is a musical mecca up there, right? It's, you've got Chanticleer, like you said, was based in the Bay Area. Kronos Quartet is also based in the Bay Area, and you've written about them a lot over the years. Let's see if there's must be another one. There's another one more recent. And there's some questions in the chat about how your musical tastes come to play when you're writing a piece, a critical piece about music, whether it's old or new? I mean, even this season, I know the symphony is doing like several world premieres. Nico Muhly, which is wonderful to some people and not wonderful to other people. How do your personal tastes come into all of these things? New music, old music. I'm not as much a classical music guy, but definitely a Russian romantic guy. So how do those musical tastes come into what you're writing about?
My musical tastes or my musical tastes are basically everything. That's what it is. So I can talk at great length about my philosophy of music criticism, classical music criticism, arts criticism in general. Everything I say about music criticism is absolutely transferable if you're interested in the visual arts, if you're interested in dance, if you're interested in video games. Cultural criticism is the same across all genres and boundaries, in my belief. And that is that what we are doing is something that everybody who has ever had any cultural experience does absolutely naturally, instinctively. It's kind of like we grow up, and whether we're taught to walk or we're not taught to walk, we end up walking, we stand up. I mean, these are things that are completely built into our nature as humans, which is to say that when you have an artistic or cultural experience of any kind, when you see a movie, when you read a book, when you go to the concert, there's a part of you that's going, is this any good? How am I liking it? What do I think about this? And if you know any people in your world, if you're not living in a cave as a hermit, you're going to have that conversation with other people. So sometimes when I talk to groups, I'll say, has anyone here ever done any classical music criticism? And nobody raises their hands. And I say, well, has anyone here ever been to a concert? And people raise their hand. And I say, has anyone here ever had a conversation after the concert in which a friend said, what did you think of that? And you told them. And the hands go up. And I say, see, that's music criticism. That's what it is. That's what we all do. That's what I do. I do it professionally. I did it in a newspaper, but the underlying activity is always the same. It's, I liked this, I didn't like that, I was moved by this, I was bored by that, I had the experience. That's the first step, right? So you have the experience, you experience that, and then you look at the experience and analyze it and try and externalize it in a way that can help you say, why I didn't like this was because XYZ. Why I thought this was so exciting was for the following reason. I remember the last time that violinist came to town and she played it this way, but now she played it that way. All of these things are going through your heads. And all of those things are completely personal, right? There's never, I try and impress this on my students when I teach music criticism. There's never a right answer or a wrong answer. That's not what we're trying to get at. What we're trying to get at is your answer. What is your answer? And the reason that criticism can be valuable to the extent that it is that it lets other cultural consumers, audience members, readers, moviegoers, theatergoers have their own experiences and sort of compare and contrast theirs with yours. In other words, you go to the symphony and you have an experience and you read my review of the symphony, and my review reflects a different experience. That's the point at which you must never say, oh, I was wrong. Kosman says it was great. I guess I missed it. Or he's wrong. I was there. It was the most boring thing I've ever heard. What is wrong with that man? All it is we've had different experiences, And if there's anything useful to come out of it, other than Kosman's an idiot, I'll know not to read him anymore, it is to compare those two experiences and say, what is it that led him to think this while I thought that? Did he miss something? Did I miss something? Did we both hear the same piece but just have different experiences of it? All of these things are part of the sort of the modeling process. So in answer to your original question, Lauren, I'm being long-winded about this, but this is a subject I'm passionate about. My personal tastes, my personal preferences are what I'm working with, right? I can't not. There's no objective ground to stand on. There's only the person I am with the experiences that I have and the tastes that I have, went to this concert and felt this way about it. Does that answer?
Okay. Yeah, that answers the question, but I'm going to belabor the point because somebody in the chat said, do you have favorites? Like someone in the chat said, are there composers or conductors that you feel are specifically very underrated maybe? Do you have favorites or does you try and pretty much not have one?
How could I not have favorites? I mean, don't you? Doesn't everyone? Don't we
Absolutely.
We absolutely have favorites. The thing I try and do as a critic and as a reporter is to try and I can't filter out those biases and tastes and preferences because that's what makes me, right? But what I can certainly do is say if it's all right, let's take a hypothetical. Suppose, just for the sake of argument, that I were a person who found Carmina Burana an absolutely tasteless, boring, uninteresting piece. Just for the sake of argument, what do I do when the orchestra continues to perform it? One thing I can do is I can go to different performances of it and say, look, Carmina Burana is schlock, but this was really well played. This wasn't, and here's why. I can say, you know what? I've at some point I can say, I've inveighed against Carmina Burana as many times as is useful. I'm no longer going to review performances of Carmina Burana. I don't actually hate Carmina Burana that much. But I will say there are very notable and very high-end successful performers to whom I gave a series of negative reviews because I hate their playing and don't understand why they have careers. And it's just me, and there's nothing to be gained by beating them up every time they come to town. And so I stopped reviewing them because nothing useful was going to come out of that. So sometimes you can just say, there's nothing to be gained from this. But other than that, I try and filter things through my own experiences.
So I'd like to reframe the question maybe a little bit because one of the things, and I'm going to throw you a curveball because I want to read you some of your reviews. Is that okay?
Yeah, go right ahead.
This is from 1999, and I'm just going to read it because I love this language, and we're going to talk about language a little bit. Some sentimental cafe music puts in an appearance, sometimes played straight, and sometimes for comic effect. So do Chopin and Cage and Errol Garner and Balinese gamelan and a funny little elegy for toy harmonicas. They come, they stay a while, they do their thing and vanish again. It's actually quite entertaining in an evanescent sort of way. The closest current comes to sustaining an idea, and perhaps not coincidentally, the strongest and most memorable section in the piece is a fierce unison passage toward the middle in which several instruments worry obsessively at a diminished chord, then give way to some machine gun counterpoint for Asian gongs. And I'm going to read one more if I can.
That is a deep cut, man. That is B-side material from the archives.
Okay, well, here's one even
Okay.
older, written for the Alexander String Quartet, which gave it a fiery, well-balanced reading. The piece encompasses a half hour's worth of arguments, cajoling, power struggles, and shifting alliances among four fiercely intelligent and headstrong voices. The first violin dreams of being a star, playing high coloratura lines where everyone else takes a back seat. The cello offers a curmudgeonly, often bluntly skeptical counterpoise. The second violin and viola, who speak their piece in a gorgeous duet called Inner Voices, mediate between these two poles while maintaining distinct identities. I just love this language. Now,
Oh,
sorry,
you're very
but
kind.
we're talking about a musical language, right? But you're coming in with the English language and almost interpreting it for us, right, in ways that we might not have even thought of. I mean, four fiercely intelligent and headstrong voices. I mean, that gives me both a mental and almost an aural picture of what you're hearing in the moment, right? What's going on? How are you using language? You said you now teach music criticism. What are you teaching about language? Translating the language of music into the language of the written word, right?
Well, right. Thank you. That I mean, I very much appreciate not only the kind words, but also your reflection, your recognition that that is indeed the specific task. I mean, I said before that uh, everything I have to say about arts criticism applies equally to music and to theater and to cinema and ballet and video games and food and everything. And that is true up to a point. But it's also the case that there are unique challenges in writing about music, which is such a nonverbal art form, and trying to do a translation. And I find that an endlessly invigorating challenge. And I would say, as with anything, that my best friend is metaphor. That is, I'm trying to describe in words something that isn't words. Um, I remember this was years ago now. I got an irritated letter from a reader because I had described a new piece of music as having, quote, crunchy textures. And they were really peeved with me about describing music as being crunchy, because you can't put it in your mouth and chomp it up like potato chips. And I thought, this is missing the entire point of what we're doing here, which is to try and use metaphorical language to bridge things that are incommensurable, and and say, this music sounds like what a crunchy texture feels like in your mouth. And I mean, I hope I was forbearing in my reply. I can't remember, this was 30 years ago now, but I mean, what they had, I felt like saying, we talk about high notes and low notes, and everybody understands what that means, but that's metaphorical too, right? Notes aren't actually high or low. They sound high. They're high on some kind of conceptual visual range that we've invented in our heads. So all of these things are trying to find ways to talk about music in ways that capture in words what can only be captured really in sound. Yeah, that's thank you. I like those pieces. I don't recognize either of those excerpts, but I'm not ashamed. Um,
Oh, it's fantastic. If anybody has the time, go back and read some of Joshua's pieces, because they're amazing music criticism. But Joshua, you mentioned a reader who wrote back to you. I'm very, very interested in community, and I did notice some letters to the editor over the years for your pieces, like you said. what is I mean, I think you've already answered this, but talk about the value of that conversation, both to your writing and to the ongoing uh, audienceship for classical music. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things tied up in there. One is that letters to the editor is one of those wonderful one of those sort of journalistic legacies that I absolutely lament because, I came up in the days of physical newspapers, and there was always a big a page of letters to the editor. We had in the Chronicle in the old days, there would be the letters to the editor on the op-ed page, and then we had our own in the arts section. We had our own letters to the editor where people would write to us about specifically things that had happened in our section. And then over the years, letters to the editor kind of dried up. I don't know why. And now that newspapers are, online, then it's the comment section, and everybody knows don't read the comment section because it's full of racist bile and just people who have too much time on their hands and not enough common sense. So I feel like that's part of the conversation that has been lost, unfortunately. I you know I always love hearing from readers. I never heard enough from readers in the course of my career to really satisfy that itch. I was always happy when people would write to me and say, "You're full of beans," or "Thank you." I mean, look, the best one is, "Thank you for saying what I felt, but in better words." Putting in words what I kind of was groping towards. Or I understand why you said that, but here's what I thought and why I disagree with you completely, and then we could have a fruitful discussion about it. You know, the letters that basically boil down to "nuh-uh" or "well, like that's just your opinion, man." Those don't really help help for further a conversation very much. But the ideal is to have some kind of lively conversation among all the players, all the participants, and there's a kind of fiction about newspapers that we're in conversation with readers, and it's a fiction I'm committed to because I think the alternative is, and this is an older model of journalism and an older model of arts criticism, and I've known older generations of arts critics who saw their role as telling people what's true, telling people what to think, pronouncing and educating the readers on, why this worked and what, I never wanted to be any part of that. I felt like I was just putting in my 2 cents, which was of equal value to anyone else's 2 cents. And I still believe that, but it is just it's a practical matter that I can speak and they can't necessarily speak back unless they sit down and write me a letter. So I was always glad to do that because it was the real evidence of a conversation happening. Because otherwise, the conversation really happened over people's kitchen table, right? I say this, they read it, they talk back to me, but they're at home. I can't hear them unless they come to me.
So with new media, like I think you said you've started this Substack thing where you're going to continue writing. Are you expecting, or are you hopeful that maybe that conversation might become a little bit more online? What the kitchen table was, is that a possibility, or
Yeah,
have you had that experience with Substack?
It's too early yet. My Substack is
Okay.
about 6 weeks old, so I haven't had too much feedback. But I mean, the internet is still finding its footing, I feel, as a reliable venue for actual conversation, right? I mean, we saw the growth of social media sites, and then they immediately devolved into hate fests and racial this and that, and bots and plagues, and I mean, nobody's quite figured out how to make that work in the way that we would have hoped. So we kind of take what we can get, which is, there was a period after the arrival of the internet where there was, in the world of classical music, a lot of sort of independent, interesting observers who were starting their own blogs and talking back and forth to one another. And I was somewhat a part of that, but I had my own pulpit, so I didn't use it too much. But it was a great opportunity for people who weren't employed at newspapers, but who went to a lot of concerts and had a lot of thoughts and wanted to engage. That's kind of tapered off in that Twitter and Facebook a little bit took over that role, and then those things became unusable for a variety of reasons. And it's as with anything sort of technological, it's a constant development and iteration. We can talk about the details, but the general idea is,
sure.
I'm old enough to feel that newspapers as they were from 1700 to 1995 are still the gold standard for everything. Again, I don't know that anyone would necessarily dispute that or agree with me, but that's my position on it.
Well, I mean, I feel like there's what you're talking about. We've had a sea change over the last several years. I don't know if it's 5, 10, 20 years, but newspapers have taken a different role. They're desperately trying to get online. Similarly, though, music and the arts are trying desperately to take on a new role because funding sources have dried up. I mean, here in LA, the Mark Taper just canceled an entire year's worth of shows, and now they're coming back and they're trying to tighten their belts a little bit financially. Just you and I had a conversation about the San Francisco Symphony. Esa-Pekka Salonen is leaving, and you, as this headline and a couple other headlines, you were struggling with that. With that a lot, but then a little bit later, you came up with this headline that it could be the golden opportunity for the right conductor. And so all of these arts organizations are trying to find a place to have a voice. What do you think music criticism and the arts are going to do with this, like you said, this new milieu where we've got social media that's toxic sometimes, newspapers kind of going out a little bit. All of these things are changing. What are your hopes? What are your dreams? Even Substack that you're coming to. What are your hopes for the near and far future?
Wow, that's a lot. Let's pick that apart a little bit. Because I think the positions of newspapers and of arts organizations are really quite distinct. So let's treat them separately. Arts organizations are in a jam, in large part because of, at this point, I think, because of the pandemic. I mean, I think it's underrated and underappreciated the extent to which shutting everything down for a year was an enormous, not to make light of, it was like a full-on explosion that just cratered the landscape and I remember quite vividly, thinking, okay, well, this will be for a couple of weeks and then we'll go back to normal. And then it was a couple months and we'll go back to normal. And then it was a year, and and at that point, people started to realize we're not quite going back to normal. But I think it's been 4.5 years now, and it's starting to be obvious, at least to me, that normal is way, way down the path, and it won't be a going back normal. It'll be a new normal. So, one of the things that happened, and I think we all experienced this, is that the pandemic, I mean, the fact that we're here on Zoom together is emblematic of this. The pandemic really forcibly and permanently reshaped our understanding and our relationship to the concept of leaving your damn house, right? I mean, the whole thing is really just reconfigured. And the big one is look at commercial real estate, right? Why do you need a 40 floor office building downtown when everyone can do their job from home on Zoom? And some people may or may not like it, and there are pros and cons, but the expectation that you have to leave your house during rush hour and commute to the office, it's been exposed as a convention, as a fiction, and if you poke at it a little bit, it starts to crumble. That's a big one. Everybody knows that one, but it's true also with, I think, the arts. I Speaking for myself, do I ever go to the movies in a movie theater anymore? Hardly ever. I'm sorry. I mean, I know the movie theaters are crashing and burning all over, but my couch is comfortable. And so long, Esther. Um, and Similarly with the performing arts, the arts organizations that I'm in touch with, that I cover with, understand that people no longer assume that leaving your house and going downtown to a show is the way to spend an evening. So all of these things that felt firmly entrenched now seem a little bit more provisional, right? So that's from our perspective, but from the perspective of an orchestra or a theater company or a ballet company that's trying to maintain its audience member, its subscriber base, its financial footing, it's a catastrophe. And I think that's been true across the board. So I mean, if you want to know where I hope things go, is that they figure out new models and new ways of getting the funding and getting the infrastructure that will support the things that these companies need to do. You mentioned the San Francisco Symphony. That's a case that's of particular concern to me. Here in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, we're enormously upset and concerned about the future of that particular organization. But I don't know whether that's of general interest to the assembled company.
I think it is, but go
I'm
ahead. Go
happy
ahead.
Look, I'll talk about any of it. But,
Well, I mean, so there was another question in the chat, and I think maybe this segues into what you've been talking about. About new composers. I mean, we've got pop and rock musicians, Paul McCartney, doing classical music now. We've got, I mentioned Nico Muhly, who was originally a classical composer, but is now doing pop and rock collaborations. Here in Southern California, the LA Phil keeps bringing in new music from seemingly random places, just all over the place. World music from the pop and rock milieu. We've got all this stuff happening, and it feels like they're all trying to come to that new place, like you're talking about, where they can find new audiences, where they can find new funding sources, so that we can keep this conversation, keep the music going, right?
Right. So again, that you put a lot in there, and let's pull those apart a little bit. First of all, Yeah, we have someone in the chat who was asking about Paul McCartney writing classical music. I'm going to respectfully dissent from that. Paul McCartney is, one of the great musicians of the 20th century, and I love his work greatly, but I wouldn't say he means anything as a classical musician, as a classical composer, nor is he a very contemporary figure at this point. But what is true is that the people who are writing classical music now, which is to say for the last 40 years, grew up listening to Paul McCartney's music and grew up listening to a whole range of music that was outside the traditional classical canon. And I'm 65. I'm sort of at the front end of that generation. I mean, the composers that I know and grew up with, like me, grew up listening to pop music as well as classical music and feeling and getting sustenance from both. And so when they started writing music, it was with a sense that there was something to be gained from all sorts of different musical styles, whether it be pop, whether it be rock or jazz or classical. This was a rarer perspective in composers of an earlier generation, who every once in a while might, do a little sort of Dizzy Gillespie imitation on the sly. But on the other hand, for the most part, we're kind of keeping whatever extra non-classical interests or influences they had out of their music. So what we're seeing now is, the second and third generations of composers who have really given up the idea that there are rigid genre boundaries among these things, right? So that you can write for orchestra with a pop or rock sensibility. You can write for a rock band with a symphonic sensibility. All of these things can come into play in a way that's interwoven and sort of musically interdependent. I think that's great. I think that's one of the reasons why contemporary and new music is much more exciting and rewarding now than it was 15 years ago, and more rewarding 15 years ago than it was 30 years ago. I think we're waiting a little bit for organizations like symphony orchestras and opera companies to notice that fact and catch up with it. I think we still have a mindset that says, sure, we'll do a new music piece here and there, but our bread and butter is still Brahms, is still Stravinsky, is still Tchaikovsky, and I suppose there's some economic data to bear that out. But I also can't help noticing that if you're a theater company, most of what you're doing is new work. If you're an art gallery, most of what you're presenting is new work. If you're a dance company, most of what you're presenting is new and recent work. It's only the orchestras and the opera companies that are still 200 and 300 and 400 years behind the times. And I wish I knew what the solution to that was, but I think once somebody figures it out, it's going to be a great day.
I mean, I'm thinking back to the times most recently that I've been really, really moved by music. And one of them was, well, both of them were in Walt Disney Concert Hall because I'm here in Southern California, but one of them was Bach's St. Matthew's Passion, which is terribly old, obviously, like you said. And the other one was another Passion, but it was the Buddha Passion by Tandun for its American premiere here in Southern California as well. And yeah, so I agree with you. There's just so much. I would totally agree with you that now versus 15 years ago versus 30 years ago, we're pulling from so many different places. Music But for me, music moves me all the time. And it feels like from the writing, even the writing that we just talked about today, music moves you as well. How is that? How do you keep that fresh? You've been doing this for several decades now. How do you keep that that freshness, that just letting the music move you while you're writing these reviews?
That's a great question. And I would say there are two answers. I'm going to take it in two parts. How does the music keep moving me? Let me ask you in turn, are you still happy when you come home and your wife is there?
Absolutely, yes.
I am too. I am too. It's one of the high points of my life, of my day rather, when I come home and my wife is there and I get to see her. That has not changed. I love music as much as I love my wife, and that is, that sounds corny, but it's nonetheless true. The question of how I keep it fresh while writing about it is a little different, but it's also still related, which is that music is endlessly changing and endlessly different. And every time I go to a musical event, there's going to be something new, something different, something exciting, something I haven't heard before, a piece I haven't heard before, or a piece I have heard before. The San Francisco Symphony played last week Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, a piece I've heard 573 times in the course of my life. And this one was a little different, and it was beautiful. I heard things in that piece that I'd never quite heard before or experienced before because of the choices that the conductor made, Esa-Pekka Salonen. He put emphasis on this and less on that, and he presented it in a way that made me think, oh, that's a different take on the Beethoven Sixth. So, as long as the artists are doing their job, as long as the performers are doing their job, it takes care of itself. I mean, I think I don't want to say that, I don't want to deny that there are people who kind of get old and cranky and have had enough of doing it. I remember the rock critic at the Chronicle once telling me about how he went to the World Series with one of the sports writers at the paper, and he was in the sports box, and he said to the sports writer, "This is so exciting." And the sports writer kind of looked at him and said, do you still get excited when you go to a rock concert? And Joel, to his credit, said, "Yes, sometimes." So, I mean, of course, there's the built-in jadedness of doing the same thing for however long. But, music is so variable and manifold and ever changing that it never gets old. It never gets old.
That is so true. Fascinating. Well, I think we could keep this conversation going for another hour or two because this is such a fantastic topic. I'm loving it. Joshua Kosman, thank you. If we were in person, there'd be a thunderous applause right now from the whole audience. But seriously, so I'll do the snaps instead. But seriously, we are so grateful that you spent this time with us.
It was a pleasure, glimpse. And thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And friends, I also want to thank you for joining us on this beautiful fall day. But wait, there's more. The Connections team continues to plan amazing events like this, and we have another one coming up during the holidays. I'm sharing my screen one more time. On New Year's Eve, Tuesday, December 31st, the Connections team, along with HumanGood President and CEO John Cochran, will toast the old and ring in the new in a lively discussion right here on Zoom again. For our special guests, don't forget to sign up when the invitation is sent out. And for residents and team members, log in as you always do. So again, from everyone here at the Connections team and from HumanGood, thank you again, Joshua, and thank you all for joining us today. I am going to go ahead and leave the Zoom open for a little while because if you guys want to unmute yourselves, ask more questions, as long as we have kind of a respectful conversation, I'd love to continue the conversation. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks.